In describing the motor system, we're going to start with the muscles and then move backwards to the brain. Muscles contract in response to input from motor neurons, whose cell bodies are located in the spinal cord. Muscle cells, also called muscle fibers, aren't neurons, but they do share the property of having voltage-gated ion channels in their membrane, which can open in response to an initial synaptic input. Motor neurons form synapses onto muscle fibers, much like the synapses between two neurons. This special synapse is called the neuromuscular junction, and the motor neuron releases a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine onto the muscle cell. The synapse at the neuromuscular junction is especially strong, so an action potential in the motor neuron will reliably generate an action potential and contraction in the muscle fiber. Each muscle, for example your bicep, contains thousands of muscle fibers. Each motor neuron will synapse onto and cause contractions in multiple muscle fibers at the same time. The exact number of muscle fibers that a motor neuron activates will depend on the muscle. For hand muscles, where smaller and fine force adjustments are required, one neuron may synapse onto only a few muscle fibers. For a large muscle, like quadricep, with less precise force control, one neuron can synapse onto more than 1,000 muscle fibers and cause them all to contract simultaneously. The neurons that control different muscles are spread out along the length of the spinal cord and project their axons to the muscles via the peripheral nerves. So the cell bodies of the motor neurons that control your arm and hand muscles are located near the top of your spine in the cervical vertebrae, while the motor neurons that control your legs are located farther down the spine. These same peripheral nerves contain the axons of other neurons carrying sensory signals, such as touch or pain, from your body into your spinal cord and ultimately up to your brain. What causes a motor neuron to fire an action potential, thus causing the muscle to contract? Motor neurons in the spinal cord get input from the brain, from local neurons in the spinal cord, and from sensory feedback, such as pain and forces on the muscles. In general, signals coming from the brain are driving and coordinating voluntary actions. Local neuronal circuits may help generate stereotyped patterns, such as locomotion, and mediate reflexes based on sensory feedback. Involuntary reflexes involve processing sensory feedback within the spinal cord itself, without ever going into the brain. For example, pulling your hand away from a burning stove is a reflex mediated purely through the spinal cord. Another example is the stretch reflex, or knee-jerk response. When your doctor has you sit with a bent knee and taps the quadriceps tendon, this stretches the muscle, which via feedback through the spinal cord causes the same muscle to contract, kicking your foot forward. This reflex, again, is mediated entirely through the spinal cord. Our next video will talk more about the signals that are sent from the brain down to those motor neurons in the spinal cord to help coordinate your voluntary movements.